I was a reporter for many years for the New York Times. I covered September 11th in New York, and then I was sent overseas to Afghanistan, and then based in India and Pakistan and all these different countries. And so somewhere along the way, I was having a conversation with a friend who's an artist, and we were talking about the 9/11 memorial competition, which was going on at the time. And we began talking about the Vietnam Veterans Memorial Competition, which had been won, you may remember, by Maya Lin in an anonymous competition many years before. And one piece of the controversy when she won that competition was the fact that she was Asian American. And it got me thinking about what the equivalent, the rough equivalent, would be for the 9/11 Memorial Competition. And I thought it would be if an American Muslim won. And I sort of instantly thought, that's a novel and somebody should write that, although I did not think I was the obvious candidate. But the idea really stayed with me, and I think that was a product of the experiences I had been having as a reporter of kind of being very intensely in New York in the aftermath of 9/11, but then also being overseas in many Muslim countries and communities and looking at our attempts to understand Islam in the wake of 9/11, to understand what we should be afraid of, looking also at Muslims' attempts to understand what Islam was in the wake of 9/11. And so I felt like both America and Islam were kind of going through these identity crises and trying to figure out how to respond to this particular event and everything that came after. So, and when I started thinking about the novel, I ended up constructing it from the perspective of 6 characters because I wanted the reader to, in a sense, have the experience I had had, which was to be shunted from perspective to perspective to perspective to perspective, and never to be able to rest entirely comfortably in one place. So the first character I thought of was Muhammad Khan, the winner of this competition. And one thing I quickly realized was that just for myself writing this book, the question of would he or would he not get to build his memorial was not interesting enough to sustain an entire novel for me. So I started thinking about his design, and I realized that the nature of his design should also become a source of ambiguity and confusion and suspicion. So his design became this garden that may or may not be Islamic. It shares elements with Islamic gardens. He refuses to say what its origins are, but nobody knows for sure. And this came partly out of my own experience. Again, in living in South Asia, I had visited a lot of Islamic gardens, and so was familiar with their design and able to weave that into the novel. The other thing I realized was that Muhammad Khan, the winner of this competition, could not be purely a victim of circumstances, that I wanted this to be a novel about character as much as politics, and in a way the intersection between character and politics. And so, whereas I think in my very early drafts he was just kind of your basic nice guy who gets caught up in a political controversy, over time he became in some ways a more complicated, difficult, stubborn, ambitious person, and that factors into how the novel unfolds. And so it's partly about the chemistry or lack of chemistry between him and the other characters in the novel. So I kind of built this cast of characters one by one. There's a widow on the memorial selection jury who is sort of trying to figure herself out in the wake of her husband's death. There's another widow who's outside the jury, a Bangladeshi immigrant, but who is facing very much the same struggle. And that was one interesting thing about writing the book is how characters who on the surface seem so different, I gradually came to see their similarities in the course of writing the book. There's the chairman of the jury, Paul Rubin. There is a journalist who is not modeled on me, who is quite willing to do almost anything to get the story that she wants. And there's a young man who's the brother of a firefighter who died in this attack. And I'll just talk briefly about how his character evolved. He actually started out as a woman named Lucy, and he was another widow also on the jury, and it just was not working as a character. And so much of writing a novel is just trial and error and then trying to repair your errors. And so at some point I realized that Lucy in a way was an error. She just was not working as a character. And so I had this revelation one day that she should really be a man. And once I gave her the sex change in the course of writing the novel, he suddenly became a much more dynamic, interesting person to me. And slowly I figured out who he was, this young guy named Sean. And he became, in a way, one of my favorites because I think it was so hard to finally figure out who he was.